Everybody, this is Jim Feist in Las Vegas, and with me today is Hank Goldberg out of Florida. And Hank, we watched another NFL shutout. I think that's 4 of them in the last 2 weeks, which is a very unusual statistic for teams to be shut out in the NFL.
Second shutout of the year for the Baltimore defense, and when they're healthy, they're pretty good. But I think I told you on our last podcast that the Dolphins' offensive line was in disarray. They played Tunsil, who has a bad knee, and he got eaten alive. He was like a revolving door, and they had a starting guard out. Pouncey's playing hurt, and they just couldn't handle the quarterback was under siege the whole night, and he. As I told you, you can't count on backup quarterbacks once they become starters. Some guys are born to become backups, and he was 2-1 last year, and he's 1-1 this year. That's the way it goes with those guys. I think his record now as a starter in the league is even 500. But I never saw him look as bad as he did last night. He couldn't do anything. But the bottom line was, they couldn't run the ball at all. And that goes back to their offensive line. As I told you the other day, the first thing I look at is offensive line problems. And going up against a decent defense, they had no shot. Ajayi had a 21-yard run, and after that, he had, I think, 3 yards and 9 carries, or 12 carries, whatever it was. They are not a good football team. I've been saying that right along. They were averaging 4 points a game in the first half of games, and they're in big trouble. Now they got a few days off, but they've got the Raiders coming in here, and then they've got the tough part of their schedule. They're going nowhere.
No,
and you had a guy on ESPN who covers the Dolphins for him, who's never right. And I called ESPN and I told him, you had a guy on there who said that if this quarterback has a good game, that he could wind up competing for the starting job. That was never the case. He could have gone out there and thrown for 500 yards, but as soon as Cutler was ready, he's going to be the quarterback of that team because they're paying him $10 million.
Well, it sometimes does come down to what they're paying people, but that can be wrong too. It comes down to, and you hit it at the first part, it's the offensive line. And offensive line play at the beginning of this year has been bad. And with all of the injuries and the attrition that's going on in the league at the offensive line position, it is only going to get worse. You're going to see it's going to be harder to run, and it's going to be harder to protect the quarterback, which means there'll be more unless the league starts to develop the recruiting process and the training process for offensive line, we're going to see this type of play for many years to come. They have to change their direction.
The perfect example is, the Giants. The Giants went out and spent all kinds of money on defense and wide receivers, but they ignored their offensive line. And they've got guys like Jerry and, guys who can't play in their offensive line. And, Eli Manning is under siege every game.
Well, look at all the quarterbacks that we've already lost. Palmer, Aaron Rodgers, now you've got Flacco out, and you got Cutler out, and all over the league. Bradford. You can't protect quarterbacks if you don't have offensive line play, and the offensive line is there for 2 reasons: block for the running backs and protect the quarterback. And what they're developing in the league, we're basically become a B league. There are no A teams. Maybe there will be a few at the end, and I'm sure in the Super Bowl we'll see some pretty good ball playing. But right now, we're dealing with this kind of stuff. And we've got some other games this week that are going to look very similar.
Well, I don't think it's all offensive line with every quarterback situation. Arizona, I saw that quarterback. He went and started to go into decline last year. You know, part of the problem is that he's just over the hill. In the case of Bradford, he's always hurt. And Minnesota's offensive line is not bad. They had a couple of injuries early, but they're playing pretty well right now. And then on the other hand, you know, and Tennessee has a pretty good offensive line. You just got a situation where that quarterback didn't get hurt because of the offensive line. He got hurt because he just took a bad step.
Well, we have some more games coming up this week where some very poor offensive line, but we also have some pretty good teams out there. The Monday night game, Denver, Kansas City, offensive line problems for Denver. You know, it's Simeon's issue. You have offensive line problems with Detroit. Pittsburgh's coming on the other side. You have a lot of offensive line problems with Washington because they had 3 offensive linemen hurt in the last game, and they were nursing 4 already. So it's a real problem there. It's all over the league, and I'm upset by the development process of paying $25-30 million to quarterbacks and then not protecting them and not having running backs that can produce some yards on the ground, which also helps protect the quarterbacks. I think the league has gone in the wrong direction.
Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. I can tell it to you, I can summarize it very simply. OTAs are far too extensive in the off season. They didn't used to have OTAs years ago. They had training camp, and they had the preseason games. They brought the guys along in preseason games, and they had to play in the preseason games, and they got ready for the preseason, and they were ready when the season started. Now, they rarely play preseason games. They rest their guys, and they do too much work in the OTAs, and then when they get into the summer, they start using these guys sparingly. They ought to go back to the old way of preparing, and again, to get rid of these OTAs, which really don't help anybody. And then by the time the guys get around to training camp, they're not in the best of shape. And they come in and then they start saving them. And they say that they want to cut back the number of preseason games to 2. That doesn't get guys ready for a season. And that's what they have to look at. The preparation for the regular season is not there. And guys come in there and they start pulling hamstrings when the season starts, because they're not in good shape.
Well, that comes from the collective bargaining agreement that the union and the league worked out, and it has not worked out for the betterment of the league. Now, we have some games that we do have on the board, that we have some selections that I know you and I both like, because we've dug in deep enough into the games that we feel we have strength either in the totals or in the sides. Are any particular games you want to talk about, Hank?
You mentioned the Denver game. Simeon has found his level. He's not a good quarterback right now, and they're going to go with him again this week. Last year, Kansas City swept Denver in the 2 games they played, and there were 2 guys who played extremely well. One was Tyreek, who actually caught 9 passes for 52 yards in one game, and then he carried the ball for a touchdown in the other game. Denver had a lot of trouble with him, and now you've got the Kansas City rookie back, who they will have trouble with because Denver is having trouble defending the run. Secondly, there's a couple of trends here. Kansas City is 7-0 in division against the division opponents coming off double-digit losses on Monday night games, and Denver is 1-10 off a division loss against a division opponent coming off a loss. So I don't see any reason why Denver should improve going into Kansas City, who had suffered a bitter loss last week, where where the game was handed to Oakland on 4 plays when time was out. It shouldn't have that shouldn't have happened. They got shafted by the officials in that game, and the play that Oakland scored the winning touchdown on, the receiver pushed off. Kansas City's not happy. Andy Reid has a great record in prime time, and I think the Denver defense. Here's a stat for you for your fantasy players. Denver's defense has given up 35 completions to tight ends this year. Kelsey's going to have a huge game because the Denver safeties can't cover and linebackers can't cover tight ends.
Interesting stats, Hank. We have a big game in Washington, Dallas and Washington. This is a NFC East. Where we have the beast of the East right now is Philadelphia. They're playing very well, and they have an offensive line issue also because they lost Peters. But this particular game, Dallas is coming off the big victory in San Francisco, and that kind of puts a better taste in their mouth after losing 2 straight home games. Now they go to Washington, and Washington played about as hard as they could. They didn't play a bad game against Philadelphia, but they sure lost some offensive linemen in that game, and now they're going to go up against a pretty stiff pass rush with some backup or off the street offensive linemen. How do you see this game?
I think Dallas is getting into stride. First of all, their defense is getting healthy. Their best defender is back in Lee, and Washington's offensive line's a mess right now. They can't protect the quarterback, and that quarterback has trouble in big games. And Dallas always plays well against Washington, but the Dallas coaching staff feels that their quarterback is as good as is playing as well as any quarterback in the league right now, and it's hard to dispute that. He doesn't make mistakes. A couple of his receivers have let him down by dropping passes at times, but and Ezekiel had a huge game against San Francisco, and this was not a week where there was any doubt that he was going to play, so he's had a whole week of work without the coaches being concerned about whether they're going to have him for this game or not. And Dallas, I think the game originally started with Washington as a slight favorite. Dallas is now 1.5 or 2-point favorite. I think the Cowboys are a real value in this game because Washington right now is so beat up, and Dallas is pretty healthy.
All good points, Hank.
By the way, Jim, one last point. For some reason, Dallas plays better on the road than they do at home.
That is true. They, especially when they're favored at home, they don't come up. Their backers don't do very well backing them at home, especially in division games. This is a big division game for this league, but I'm not too sure Washington's healthy enough to do anything about it. Any other NFL games you like to talk about?
Yeah, I think Pittsburgh. You and I talked about this, but the Steelers right now are also playing well, and they're getting better every week. And they started to play better when they started giving the ball to Bell. And right now, Bell is the number 1 receiver in football, and Brown is the second rated receiver in football. So, and you've got a team that going up against a Detroit team that only has 13 sacks all year. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, has 24 sacks, going up against a quarterback who had ankle and knee injuries when he played 2 weeks ago. I don't know if Stafford is 100% right now. He didn't look too good at New Orleans. And Detroit is 2-7 as a home dog. They don't play well against teams with a winning record. And Pittsburgh right now, I think Fat Face is playing solid football right now. And if he can not make mistakes, I think Pittsburgh goes in there at a decent number. And I think the Steelers right now are starting on defense. They're really playing well.
Well, we have all excellent points, and definitely the Detroit is coming off a little bit of extra rest, but they definitely were banged up in that last game. Some of the offensive line problems also. We have another game.
Hey, Jim, the last two games they gave up 79 points to defense against Carolina and New Orleans.
Yeah, their defense has not stood up very well lately, that's for sure. And Pittsburgh is starting to roll. There's no question about that. We have another game that I'm sure the people in London are going to be real happy to see the Cleveland Browns roll in there. But that's a 9:30 Eastern time, 6:30 Pacific time game. Minnesota opened 7.5. It's up to 9.5 or 10.5. Some places are 10.5. So that's a very interesting, and Minnesota is far superior talent-wise, and Cleveland doesn't seem to know what they're doing at quarterback. Every week it's a different starter. What a mess that organization is. This is the same organization that passed on Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz, Goff. I mean, that's a mess. So do you think there's any chance whatsoever Cleveland shows up and plays a decent game there?
Well, they've now lost their best offensive lineman. He's out for the season. So they have injuries on top of everything else. And I think they could actually go winless. I don't give them any shot at all. You know, Minnesota's, remember we have them at a pretty good price to win the whole thing. And if they get one of their starting quarterbacks to return, and Keenum can keep them together until that happens. You know, they've got a good running back right now who has been filling in, and their offensive line is playing much better. They've been running the ball effectively, and Keenum is not making mistakes. And as long as that happens, I think Minnesota's going to be all right. You know, and they're strong in that division because Green Bay's. You know, I don't think Green Bay's going anywhere without the Rodgers, and Detroit right now is all beat up, and you know Chicago playing well on defense, but you know how far can they go when they throw the ball 7 times a game?
Yeah, they had 5 first downs in their last game. I don't think that's going to take you too far. Hank, anything going on this week in the horses?
Next week is the Breeders' Cup. I've started doing the work on it. There's some very competitive races. The Classic is going to be a terrific race, and I think there could be an upset in the Classic, but I'm not giving that away. If people want to know who that's going to be next week, they can call the service. Absolutely.
Well, Hank, thank you very much. Let's have a great weekend. We got college football, we got pro football, and
we got the World Series going on, and Jim, you were right. You know, I had the winner the other night, and so although I thought Verlander, I got to tell you something. That game Wednesday was the worst managed game I've ever seen in a World Series. One manager runs out of pitchers, and the other guy takes his closer and puts him in the 8th inning instead of the 9th inning, and the guy had nothing left in the 9th inning, and he did his best to blow the game. But what happened was, with Houston coming back and evening the series, now you have a reasonable price on the Dodgers if you want to take the Dodgers for the series, which is what I'm going to do.
Well, it has been an amazing run in baseball. Right now I'm on an 11-1 run with my baseball selections. And Hank's plays, horses, sports, baseball, football, basketball, and mine are all available at jimfeist.com. So, Hank, thank you again very much for this podcast.
Jim, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Penn State, Ohio State.
You know, Penn State, they did a great job last week. Ohio State is in a perfect situation to upset them. The problem is the number is a little bit high, in my opinion. Barrett's had a great year, 24 touchdowns, 1 interception. This is a big spot for them, and probably the loser of this game is not going to be considered for the playoffs, but the winner has a chance to go forward. It's going to be one heck of, and I'm going to have a play on this game. It'll be on the service. So when you get my plays for this weekend, it'll be there.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, well, you can help a pal out privately, but I got to tell you something. Urban Meyer has only lost 1 game in his entire coaching career, coming off a bye, and that was when he was coaching against Fat Face. It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. That's right. Have a great weekend, Hank.
You too.
Okay.